their year. How many times have we heard that? And they fail on an epic scale, just as we've done. We've had expectations that we failed to live up to, and a lot of them say the only good thing that's come out of Georgia is Herschel Walker. Now, that's just asinine. Now, if we're going to go off, I guess that's their logic. You're not nothing unless you win a Heisman Trophy. Well, let's go off of their logic. How many Heisman Trophy winners have they had? Zero.
None.
Zero. So that means you guys have never had anything. So we've had 2 Heisman Trophy winners. So let's just use that argument. Frank Sinquick and Herschel Walker, the only 2 good things that have ever come out of Georgia. Well, we've got 2. You morons got 0. So I'm using your logic against you guys. So I just really hate stupid arguments, man. I really do, and we hear this all the time on YouTube.
This back and forth about you never live up to expectations. Well, let me ask you this, Clemson fans. What are your expectations every year? What are they? Are you living up to them? As a Georgia fan, I expect to be in contention for a national title. Major Division I program in the best conference in America. We have a top 10 recruiting class every year. We're surrounded by talent. Yes, my expectations are that we contend for a national title every year. Now, if a year comes along that we don't contend for a national title, and you want to tell me that means Georgia's not living up to its expectations, and you're using that as a way to bash Georgia or Georgia fans, well, what are your expectations, Clemson? Are your expectations to average 8 wins a year and play in a Christmas Bowl? Then congratulations, you're living up to your expectations. But I'm not going to apologize for Georgia not living up to its expectations. My expectations are sky high for Georgia. And let's be honest, only one team a year can, quote-unquote, live up to expectations if the expectations is a national title. And that's what it is. As a Georgia fan, I expect us to contend for an SEC title and a national title every year. Now, does that end up happening every year? No. But at the beginning of every year, any logical person, the last 10 or 15 years, any logical person looks at Georgia and says they have a shot. And that's all I ask for as a fan. And if that means we're not living up to our expectations, then we're not living up to our expectations. But we've had one coach for 15 years, averaging 10 wins a year. We're beating our rivals. We're going to major bowls. We're recruiting any player we want anywhere in the country. And I'm happy with that. I'd love to win a national title, and it will come. It will happen. I believe it. I really believe that. But I'm sick of this. Georgia doesn't live up to expectations every year. Well, that's because our expectations are high, Clemson. If your expectations are 8 wins a year, then congratulations. You're living up to expectations, and we're not.
Yeah, and as far as that argument, and that's something else, I know I was talking about where they said that the only thing we've ever had to come out of Georgia was Herschel Walker. Another argument is it's like apparently you're not a good team unless you win a national title, because the popular argument you hear from every fan base is, when's the last time you won a national title? You know what? I hate that argument myself, because I mean you're insulting teams like our 2002 team. What was it? 13-1. We could have easily been there. 2007. Or like we've talked about this many times. We could have been there. 2012. We were really close. You can have good football teams and not win a national title. Okay, just because we did not win a national title this certain year, doesn't mean that we outright sucked. Well, I mean, we could probably come over to whoever's house and beat the hell out of them. I hate that argument. People consider you like irrelevant unless you have won something in the last year or two. I mean, you can have really good teams and never, not win a national title. That's oh man, like that's an argument that really irritates me.
Only one team a year can win it all. I mean, does that mean that only one team a year has a good season? I mean, that's just ridiculous. I don't buy into that. Now, have there been years that I, as a Georgia fan, think we had a bad season? Yes, of course there has. But that doesn't mean that every time we don't win the national title, I think we had a bad season. That's just ridiculous. You're not an elite program because you haven't won a national title in 35 years or whatever. Well, the stats would disagree with that. I mean, we're averaging 10 wins a year. We're in major bowls every year. I could run through the whole list again. We recruit whoever we want. But the point is, you don't have to win a national title to be considered a legitimate team. That's just ridiculous. I don't buy into that. Has Oregon been a good team the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years? I would say so.
Yeah, they've definitely been a good team.
Has Oklahoma been a good team the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years? No national titles. I mean, I could go on and on with these teams who haven't won a title in the last 10 years. It doesn't mean they haven't had a good team in the last 10 years. It's just ridiculous.
Do you believe?
Clemson had a good team last year. Clemson's team last year was one of the best teams they've had in the last 30 years. Were they sorry because they didn't win a national?
All right, it looks like we lost you for a sec, Lou.
Oh, okay. I'm back. Am I back now?
Yeah, you're back. I had a quick question for you though.
Yeah.
Real quick. I don't mean to cut you all show, but do you think with the playoffs starting this year, we'll see more different teams win national championships because it's not going to be as easy as one game you're in anymore?
That's a really good possibility. I mean, that right there. I mean, I am so glad the playoff is in place because now, instead of, computers and somebody saying, okay, let's put these two teams there because this is who we think are the best, now these teams are actually going to get to play each other. And there again, my argument's going to be, let's go back to 2007. 2007 was probably the craziest year in college football. Everybody had 2 losses minus Ohio State. Why? Because they didn't play a stupid conference championship game. But everybody else had 2 losses. How can you sit there and just pick out teams that you say, okay, they deserve to be there, when they had 2 losses just like everybody else? The playoffs is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I tell you what's going to be interesting. This sort of ties into what we were talking about in the beginning when we were ranking the conferences. There's 4 playoff teams. There's 5 major conferences. So at least one conference is going to have their conference champion left out of the playoff this year. And whatever conference that is going to raise hell about it. Who's it going to be? Now, I'll tell you right now, if Florida State doesn't go undefeated, they won't make the playoff because the ACC as a whole is too weak. If they don't run the table, I think they'll be the one that gets left out. Now, obviously, if they run the table, they'll be in. The Big Ten or the Big 12, I think, is your other possibility there. I think whoever wins the Pac-12 is in for sure. Whoever wins the SEC is in for sure. And then, of course, you have the possibility of a second team getting in from probably the SEC, maybe the Pac-12, depending on how that shakes out with Oregon and Stanford. But at least one conference, one of the Big 5, is going to have a team left out. It's hard to say right now who it'll be. I can't really see Florida State losing a game this year. I have a feeling they'll be there. And I think they'll probably get some votes, maybe even if they have one loss since they won it last year. But if there's not an undefeated team in the Big 10 or the Big 12, they're probably going to be the ones on the outside looking in. And nothing would make me happier than for Ohio State to win the Big 10 and then have to play in the Capital One Bowl because they got left out of the playoffs. That would be so sweet.
Speaking of Ohio State, now this kind of goes back to what we were just talking about a little earlier. Now, let's go back to 2002 where Ohio State ended up winning that national title. Our 2002 team went 13-1. Now, I may be one of the people that are considered like the outcast in this, but I personally believe that 2002 Georgia team could have walked the dog on that Ohio State team. Like you mentioned it, like Ohio State cannot play an SEC team. Now, there are the other conferences out there, yeah, they can have a team come in and on any given Saturday they can knock one of us off, but Ohio State just cannot do it, period. And our 2002 team was definitely one of the best we ever had. So that just goes back to what we were saying. Just because we didn't win the national title, does that mean we sucked and Ohio State was that much better? Hell no. That's. I mean, I'm right with you as far as Ohio State, man. I just think Ohio State's a joke. And
they are a joke.
If they do get into the playoffs, I'm fully expecting them to get murked off the field by an SEC team, man.
That would be sweet to see, without question. And I hate to play the what if game. Well, what if we'd have had to play off then, or what if this, or what if that? But in 2002 and 2007, Georgia would have made a 4-team playoff in both of those years. And I know in 2007 there wasn't a team walking planet Earth that wanted to play Georgia at the end of the year. We were red hot. That was the year of the Auburn blackout and where we stormed the field at Florida. I mean, we were the hottest team in America at the end of the year. Nobody wanted to play the Dogs. Now, it doesn't do any good to go back and say that now. Of course, we had no playoff then. We had the BCS, and they matched 1 versus 2. But, yeah, 2002, 2007 would have been sweet as a Dog fan had we had the 14 playoff back then.
Well, 2012 as well, just a couple years ago. Georgia would have definitely been one of those teams in the playoffs. I think they showed that when they played against Alabama. I mean, we've had so many teams that could have been there, man.
My concern, when you talk about the way the 2012 season ended, my concern with the way these things are going to shake out with the playoff, I think the SEC, or any conference for that matter, has a better chance of getting 2 teams in from the same division, sort of like how Alabama and LSU rematched for the title a few years ago. I think if you look at the Georgia-Alabama game, I think the 13-member committee or whatever it is, when they're sitting in that room, would have a hard time putting Georgia into the 14 playoff when they basically just played a playoff game against another team they're putting in Alabama. So I don't know. In 2012, if we had the playoff system, I'm not sure they would have put Georgia in. I mean, I hear you. I think Georgia and Alabama were the 2 best teams that year in the country by far. But I'm worried that in that scenario, they're not going to put the losing team of a championship game in. I think they would be more likely to, let's say we're 11-1 and South Carolina's 11-1. But Carolina owns a tiebreaker and they play Alabama in the SEC championship game, and Alabama wins. Georgia's 11-1, didn't play in the SEC title game. Alabama whoops Carolina. I think in a scenario like that, they're more likely to put Alabama in and then Georgia. I think they're going to have a hard time putting the team that loses the title game into the 14 playoff.
Okay, well, I can see that. But let's stay with 2012. I think it was clear that both Georgia and Alabama were better than Notre Dame. I don't see why Georgia and Alabama wouldn't have gone to the playoff over Notre Dame. I mean, Notre Dame, they were clearly overrated. You know, they didn't really play anybody. So it's like if you're trying to put the teams in the playoff, you want to put the best teams in there. I mean, who cares, like, you know, if they just played each other? They're the best teams, you know? I mean, that at least if I'm part of the committee, that's what I'm looking at. What teams are the best, regardless if they, you know, played each other? You know, what teams belong? Yeah. You know, that's the way.
Well,
I would look at
these conversations right here is what's going to make this radio show and every other college football radio show so popular in October, November, and December of this year, because I'm telling you, no matter what 4 teams end up getting picked for that playoff, there's going to be a 5th, a 6th, and a 7th, and an 8th team that are going to be raising hell. It's going to happen. 4 teams, like you said, is a step in the right direction, but you know, you got to cap it somewhere. Right now it's capped at 4. You're still going to have an argument of, well, it was the 5th team should have been in there instead of the 4th team, or the 6th team was better than the 4th team. It's going to make for some interesting radio at the end of the season, that's for sure.
Well, I definitely, here's what I think. Now, right now it's stuck at 4 teams, but honestly, what I think is going to happen, and if it happens, you can say you heard it here first. I think that the playoffs are actually going to go to 6 teams, and I think it's going to be the format like what the NFL has. Like, you've got, let's say, number 1 and number 2 seeds would get a bye, and then you have you line up everybody else. I think that the playoffs are actually going to get to that. Now, when, I don't know, but I think that when you look at it, usually